Allura red, red 17, E129 if you're in Europe, or red 40. This bright red dye goes by a lot of names, and depending on who you ask, it comes with a lot of baggage too. It's been connected to hyperactivity in kids with ADHD, anxiety, stomach issues, even a possible link to cancer. So, how did this controversial chemical end up in our fruit punch, our candies, cereals, and even medicine like our cough syrup? Welcome to Health and History, where we curiously discuss the history of things that impact our health and what led to the health culture and society we see today. We'll be taking a curious dive into the surprising history of red dye 40, where it came from, why it's still around, and what scientists are just beginning to uncover about its effects on our health. Coloring food isn't a new idea. People have been doing it for thousands of years. Everything was dyed, from clothes and fabric to cosmetics. Even wine colors were made using plants like turmeric and saffron, or minerals like iron oxide. But fast forward to the 1800s and things changed drastically. A chemist named William Henry Perkin accidentally discovered the first synthetic dye, which was mauve, while trying to develop a new malaria treatment. That little accident opened the floodgates to a whole new era of cheap synthetic dyes made from coal tar. Suddenly, food dyes were vibrant, affordable, and everywhere. They were in food, in medicine, in makeup, but no one was really regulating what was in them, which was a problem because some of these early dyes contained things like lead, arsenic, and mercury, literally poison. Finally, someone started to pay attention because in 1906, the U.S. Department of Agriculture passed down the Pure Food and Drugs Act, which banned the use of dangerous substances in food dyes and prohibited coloring food to hide spoilage. By 1931, 15 synthetic dyes were approved for use in food. Among those were FDNC Blue Number 1, FDNC Yellow Number 5, and FDNC Red Number 3. Not Red 40, not yet at least. Red dye number 3, also called erythrosine, was the star player before red dye 40 hit the shelves. It was often used for the cherry red color it brought to desserts, candies, and some medications. It was used for decades until January 15, 2025, when the FDA declared the dye banned due to studies linking it to cancers in male rats. Interestingly enough, when researching this dye, I came across the fact that red dye number 2, the lesser known cousin of red dye number 3, had been banned in the US in 1976. And it was actually due to red dye number 2 being shut down that the public grew concerned about red dye number 3. And a study was carried out in 1987 which first linked red dye number 3 to have carcinogenic effects on rats. In 1992, the FDA first announced its intentions to revoke authorized use of red dye number 3. But obviously, that did not happen until this year, over 3 decades later. Anyways, red dye number 2 was out of commission, and because the FDA was giving the bombastic side eye to red dye 3, there needed to be a replacement dye in food fast, and that's where red dye 40 comes in. Developed by the Allied Chemical Corporation in 1971, it was designed as a safer alternative to red dye 3. That same year, the FDA approved it, and boom, it became the new red standard for everything from fruit snacks to ice pops to children's cough syrup. Now, here's where it gets a little bit confusing for some, because red dye 40 is not the same as red dye 3. When I went into researching, I assumed that it was red dye 40 that was banned this year, but it was actually red dye 3. And it's the super bright cherry red dye that was banned by the FDA. Meanwhile, red dye 40 has a different chemical makeup. It is more deep red orange, and it is currently approved by the FDA and used widely across the US.
Have you ever wondered what gives certain foods a vibrant red color? Well, it's likely from additives, including those commonly known as red dye number 3 and red dye 40. A viewer reached out to us asking about the differences between the two, so let's verify. Our sources include the Food and Drug Administration and the Center for Science in the Public Interest. Both red dye number 3 and red dye number 40 are derived from petroleum. Red dye 3 is commonly used in candy, cakes, cookies, maraschino cherries, even pills. In January of this year, the Food and Drug Administration banned the use of red dye number 3 in food and drugs, citing potential health concerns. Research shows that lab rats that consumed high levels of red dye 3 developed cancer. However, the FDA adds the way it causes cancer in rats does not occur in humans. Red dye number 3 is also linked to hyperactivity and attention problems in children. Now, red dye 40 is often added to sodas, candy, and cereals. Several studies have linked red dye number 40 to increased hyperactivity in some children, especially those with ADHD. It is fully approved in the U.S., but some European countries include warning labels, while the U.K., red dye number 40 is largely phased out. You can find a full list of food additives right now on the FDA's website.
Okay, so it's time to ask the question that's been on all of our minds. Is red dye 40 safe? Well, it depends on who you ask. According to a 2023 study found in PubMed, red dye 40 has been found to damage DNA, both in test tubes and in living organisms. Red dye 40 has also been shown to trigger colon inflammation in mice fed a high-fat diet and dysbiosis, which is like an imbalance in the gut microbiome. There are also behavioral concerns. This understood article addresses the popular controversy of red dye 40 that it causes ADHD in children and young adults. The article confirms that red dye 40 does not cause ADHD. However, it does state that there is a correlation between red dye 40 and hyperactivity. The effect is usually temporary. However, if the dye is a consistent part of a person's diet, the effects could be more extreme than someone who takes it every once in a while. The intensity of the symptoms or showing symptoms can all depend on the person's sensitivity to red dye 40. The best way to know about a specific sensitivity is to talk with your healthcare provider. The concern about the dye has been consistent enough that many European countries have had warning labels about the possible adverse effects on kids that the dye might have. Many promote the use of natural dyes like beet juice or paprika extract instead. So there are these potential health issues. Why is it still in almost all of our food products, from cereals and soft drinks to even protein powders and chips? The short answer, it works. It's bright, it's stable, cheap, and it doesn't fade under heat or light. Natural alternatives like beet juice or carmine don't always hold up in processing or give the same intense color that red dye 40 does. Plus, switching over could cost companies a lot. And unless there's regulatory pressure or consumer demand, they're not rushing to change. We can see this with the recent ban of red dye 3 in January 2025. The FDA is giving companies until 2027 to officially change the ingredients in their products, leaving the burden on customers to watch out for these dyes in their products. But some brands have started phasing it out, especially in products for kids. And with growing consumer awareness, that pressure is only increasing. So, after researching, I had an overwhelming sense of, so now what? You're telling me that this potentially cancerous dye is in almost every food product, and there's really nothing I can do except for to cut it out of my diet completely or ignore the information and keep consuming it. And to that I say no and yes. While it is true we'll have to be a bit more aware about the things we eat if we want to avoid the dye, things are changing for the better. That's how red dye 3 became banned over 30 years of suspicion. The goal isn't to fearmonger, it's about being aware and being allowed to do our best with the information given to us. And one of the resources I came across that can be a great reference point to continue learning from is the FDA's color additive Q&A for consumers. And it's a great place to start looking for any questions you want answered. Also, today, there's definitely a greater acknowledgement of how unhealthy red dye 40 can be for us in our current society. And companies are definitely starting to take notice. On June 17th, the Kraft Heinz company announced that it will be doing away with all synthetic dyes in their products. Who knows? Maybe the FDA's ban on red dye 3 will be a catalyst to a purge in food dyes in the US. Or companies might just get better at hiding them in their products. And with that, we'll conclude our sneak peek into the history of red dye 40. From coal tar chemistry to kids' cereals, it's a journey of science, marketing, and still some questions left unanswered. Only time will tell where synthetic dyes end up in our society. Thank you for joining me on this first deep dive, fellow amateur historians. If you learned something new, have any info to share, or any suggested topics for what to look into next, feel free to drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you want more curious deep dives, make sure to subscribe, to like, and to share the video to support the channel. Until next time, stay curious and check your ingredient labels.